Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Rick Stein, and I'm the President and CEO of Arts Orange County. We're your nonprofit countywide arts council, and we have been offering the Voices Veteran Storytelling Program since 2015. It's just been a joy for us to learn and be enriched by the stories that veterans have shared with us and with the community from before, during, and after their military service. We've had every branch of the military represented, and the oldest veteran we had participate was a 103-year-old woman who had been in the WACs during World War II. And the youngest was a 25-year-old veteran of the Afghanistan War. So we've had quite a range, and men and women and LGBTQ people of every background, and it's been just wonderful to hear everybody's stories. We want to thank 5th District Orange County Supervisor Katrina Foley, who made funds available to support this program. And we'd like to thank OC Music and Dance for hosting us today in their facilities here. This is their theater, and Walter Yankowski back here is their COO, and he is himself a Marine Corps veteran. And OC Music and Dance operates Operation GIG, which is a program for military veterans for training in the area of sound engineering and recording. So that's wonderful. I'd like to thank Patrick Bryan, who is our VP and COO, looming in the background there, who coordinated it this year. And then I am now going to introduce to you the teaching artist and coordinator of the Voices program, a former participant himself and military veteran, Giovanni Berdejo.
First and foremost, thank everyone for making the time to be here today. And especially thank you to our veterans, because I know you're missing out on some free meals and probably a free car wash at that. But again, thank you for your time. Thank you for just being present here and hearing these incredible stories. Every veteran has a story to share, and that story can somehow impact another veteran. That's why I'm very passionate about this work, and I'm passionate about sharing other veteran stories. In some ways, you don't know whose lives you might touch by sharing or even listening to these stories. Before we begin, I want to do some brief introductions. If I can have our presenters, starting with Jose, just introduce first name, last name, branch of service, and the city you reside in, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jose Gutierrez. My branch of service was the United States Army, and I currently live in Orange.
Hi, everybody. My name is Merlin Solares. I also served in the U.S. Army, and I reside in Fontana.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Emilio Gallegos. I served in the United States Marine Corps, and I born and raised and live in San Jose, California.
Again, thank you everyone for making the time to be here today. And with that said, I will let us begin the show.
All right. So growing up, I was a pretty nerdy kid. Played video games, read comic books, bit of an artsy geek, drew all the time. And I spent all of my free time outside of doing homework, working or playing basketball with my friends. I'd started working when I was 14, so any money I saved up, I'd used to go to this place called a PC Bong, or internet cafe, where me and my friends would play in different tournaments for video games, like Counter-Strike or Day of Defeat. And I generally kept my circle of friends pretty small. And around junior year of high school, everyone was starting to talk about going to college. I'm a first-generation immigrant, so I had no idea what they were talking about. So I figured I'd probably just end up finding a job while I saved up enough money to go to college. It just seemed expensive and inaccessible to me at that time. And I didn't know about the enrolling process. I also didn't think I would be good enough for it.
So I had two jobs in the Army. I initially enlisted as a 35 November, which is a signals intel analyst. I held a top secret clearance and worked alongside the National Security Agency, so NSA Texas, while I was stationed at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. I hated this job. It brought so many good opportunities through networking with NSA civilian workers, paid trainings, holding a top secret clearance, and the experiences you needed to qualify for a job to work with NSA, FBI, or CIA in general. The problem for me was not feeling satisfied with the work I was doing. I found it pointless and empty. I worked in a building with no windows, behind a computer screen all day, and no job satisfaction. I felt like the work I was doing wasn't making a difference, and I wasn't able to excel.
Activated at the beginning of 2003 after gathering with a group of sister units from around the country, including one from Puerto Rico, most of the Marines from the 4th Landing Support Battalion were deployed to Iraq to support the initial invasion. I was based out of Camp Pendleton for much of the year, with a small contingency of Red Patchers, part of the Force Service Support Group. From the port of National City, California, I helped our Army counterparts process every vehicle that was convoyed in from various bases over the last couple weeks of February. Vehicles that would be some of the first to touch down in theater to support the Operation Iraqi Freedom efforts. I would eventually deploy to Iraq in 2008, setting foot in country on April 6, 2008. In my head, I had pictured so much busyness around landing in a combat zone, loud noises, chaos, bodies, and vehicles zipping from place to place. It was nothing like that. I remember the rear cargo door of the plane slowly descending as we all stood in two long chalks waiting to disembark, and slowly feeling the most intense heat my body has ever known. I saw Marines I knew near the end of the tarmac directing our fresh bodies, wearing trousers and skivvy shirts with no immediate danger anywhere in sight, and I realized all the commercials and movies had lied to me. I spent almost 3 months feeling as safe as can be, working security duty, manning towers on the outskirts of this base before getting sent over to a much smaller base nearby to join a QRF team, Quick Response Force team, that regularly faced real in-theater problems.
Most of the gunfights or firefights don't last very long. The ones that do can get intense, and you just want to end it as quickly as possible. You get tired a lot quicker when you're engaged in a fight. Adrenaline can only carry you for so long before you crash. I've been in a couple that lasted a while, maybe an hour or two at the longest. It went so long that we needed air support to come and end that shit. We were just tired of playing whack-a-mole with the insurgents and chasing them throughout the city.
I had recently felt lost in my job, directionless, and I didn't see myself excelling in that field, so promotion seemed impossible. I had all the physical parts down and didn't lack in that area, but intellectually, I felt behind my peers and lost. My section chief allowed me to deploy with the 7th Special Forces Group in Honduras, where I met a civil affairs specialist who explained to me an overall picture of the job. It was part of the Special Operations Branch, and I knew I needed that challenge to get me out of this rut. I had just returned from my first deployment and knew exactly where I wanted to go next. I was training to go to Civil Affairs Assessment and Selection, and every day after work I would start with a 3 to 5 mile run. On October 7, 2014, that was no different. I just didn't have the energy that day, and I remember feeling extremely lethargic, but going out anyway. I ended up getting hit by a car while I was running. She completely knocked me out, and I just remember running, seeing black for a few seconds, and coming back to consciousness while I was walking. A few civilians came running to me to ask me if I was okay. I took a trip to the hospital to make sure I was okay, and I walked away with some nasty scrapes and a dislocated shoulder. 2 days later, on October 9, 2014, one of my high school friends passed away in a motorcycle accident. The immense survivor's guilt I felt still lingers to this day. Having to process that loss and accept that it wasn't my time to go has been hard. I honor him by running half marathons every year since that date. I try to keep it at a minimum of 1 run a year, Some years I've been fortunate enough to run multiple events in his honor.
I feel I was really mishandled when I returned to the States after my injury in Iraq. The care I received along the way back was amazing. The TQ surgical team on Al Taqadum, the hospital in Balad, Iraq, and the hospital in Ramstein, Germany all handled me with the utmost care and concern. I was allowed to see and experience a certain part of the military that the majority of its population doesn't get a chance to appreciate. However, once I arrived at the Naval Hospital aboard Camp Lejeune, I began to get put through what I felt and still feel was a very unnecessary amount of movement and changes to living conditions. I felt like I was prematurely removed from the Naval Hospital at Camp Lejeune by a master sergeant who didn't know me and I didn't know him, but he was a part of 2nd Lad out of Cherry Point, the unit we attached to and deployed with in early 2008. I was pulled from a hospital bed for no reason or communication about exactly why it would happen. With a heavily bandaged leg, recently sutured from an emergency fasciotomy, I was driven to Cherry Point to be thrown into a barracks room on the bottom floor of an empty building. I was on crutches with no help from anyone. I had to drag one of the heavy wooden desk chairs as close as I could to the shower so I could try my best not to wet my leg as I was advised. I would place my right foot outside of the shower curtain whenever I could bathe myself and navigate that tight space with only my left foot, no railings for support. I was angry and confused. When I wasn't struggling to shower in that lonely barracks room, I was calling the company office to figure out why no one had taken me to my other appointments at the Naval Hospital. I found myself sitting silently or hobbling on my crutches to the nearest shopette, which happened to be about a quarter mile away. After purchasing what I needed, I would work my way across the quarter mile back to my barracks room with plastic bags swinging around my crutches, bouncing off both legs, and taking breaks whenever I needed to. I don't remember exactly how long I was in that barracks room before someone at Cherry Point had enough common sense to realize that I shouldn't be alone in a barracks room, struggling to survive. So it was decided that I would be moved back to Camp Lejeune to be checked into Wounded Warriors East Battalion, which sounded great, sounded like the right move, sounded like progress. Although I still felt like I should have still been in the hospital. I was brought to Camp Lejeune late one afternoon by a junior Marine, and I quickly realized that he had no idea exactly where he was going, nor did I. And the admin office that was supposed to check me in to Wounded Warriors Battalion not only had no idea I was coming, but was closed for the day by the time we got there. I ended up checking into the Wounded Warriors Battalion later that evening, and after finally feeling like I was somewhere I belonged, at least somewhere that had rooms with handicap rails in the showers and along most of the walls in the building, I only stayed there for one night. I was there for one night before I was taken to live on the 2nd floor of another practically empty squad bay. In the dark building with what felt like hundreds of sets of beds along either side of the room, one person was living on one end that I hardly ever ran into, and I was on the other. It was the rainy season in North Carolina, so, of course, being on the 2nd floor and having to navigate up a metal staircase on crutches didn't make the most sense. I had to drag another one of those heavy desk chairs through the squad bay and out into the hallway into the community bathroom, just to shower again, struggling day after day not to collapse in the open.
I guess for me, leaving the service was just another experience in life. One hell of an experience. An experience I was glad I had, but one I wouldn't want to go through again. The biggest thing that kept me from re-enlisting was that they mentioned I would have to go to Korea if I re-enlisted, or could avoid it by signing an extension and staying with my unit that was deploying again. Both of those options weren't appealing, so I decided to go with the reserves and go home. The most memorable things were being told what I needed to do, but having no guidance on where it was or what I needed to bring there. They just gave us a packet and said, go figure it out. They'd still fuck with you when you try to did it. Some of the NCOs or other soldiers would talk shit about you getting out, and others recognized that without the Army, they would be struggling, and they needed to square away their shit before taking that step. Some loved the shit and were sad you didn't love it as much as them, but they understood why you would leave. The one thing I do remember was the fear-mongering, I was getting out in 2009 during one of those generational economic recessions that seem to happen every other year now. People are constantly badgering you about what you're going to do for money or how you're going to survive. That was memorable. Other than that, it was just another process with the Army, half-assed and useless. But I got out, and that's all that matters.
Before I joined the Marine Corps, I was already a lot of things. I was a 21-year-old father of a 2-year-old son. I had been through about a year and a half of college and already worked a couple different jobs. I was an art major in my first year of college, painting and drawing being something I'd done very well for most of my life. I was also on the wrestling team at San Francisco State University, another discipline I had found success in for much of my life as well.
I had previously asked my dad if I could join right after high school, but I was 17 at the time and he was furious at my request for his signature. I remember feeling lost, not knowing what I wanted to study at this point. I was getting ready to turn 20 and I hit a point where I realized I was burning myself out by forcing to take classes to check a box for my dad. I accepted that if I wasn't going to take college classes, I was going to do something productive and join. The funny thing is, I originally walked into the Marines office and spoke about enlisting, but I had stretched my piercings too big for them to take me right then and there. They told me, you can either get them surgically closed or get sandpaper and grind your skin to open it and let it heal shut. I remember my recruiter, Staff Sergeant Robin Nair. He was a 6-foot-tall ginger, and his MOS, or his job, was air traffic control, and an extremely mild-mannered person. He was so chill that I had zero hesitation about signing anything. He looked at my ears and said, "That's not a problem, we can get you signed up." I remember the first day I arrived at boot camp, but I don't remember the first week of boot camp. The first day we showed up to the holding area, you get all your physical, dental done. They show you what a formation looks like or how to march and the basics of it all. I remember being excited to be anywhere but home. I felt excited to be out in another state, experiencing what life was like outside from under that little rock.
I was stationed in Hawaii and Washington, and I deployed in Iraq. Iraq wasn't as hostile as the media made it out to be. Was it dangerous? Hell yes. Were the Iraqis angry? Most definitely. Most of them just wanted to live their normal lives, but the most powerful military in the world just happened to invade their country. It spurred a lot of anger within the local populace, pushing them to defend their homes and creating an open invitation for American forces to come over and fuck around. Most of my interactions with the populace were just people tired of the violence and angry with everyone who carried a gun. However, their loyalties were split. Some remembered the Americans abandoning the Kurds during the first Gulf War and didn't trust Americans. Some used Americans for what they could and generally did what they could to get it, including attacking our coalition forces. And there were those who just wanted to kill Americans. Outside of that, the country was beautiful. Outside of the villages destroyed in the fighting or the farmland pockmarked with explosions, it was gorgeous. A little too hot in the winter and somehow too cold in the summer sometimes, but perfect in the spring. I could see why human civilization started in this region. It was lush, and Baghdad being in the delta of two major rivers probably made it nutrient-rich land to farm and a defensible territory. The whole place was just awe-inspiring from the historical aspect of how ancient things were compared to the wholesale violence we were dropping into that region. It wasn't what I expected.
A common misrepresentation or misunderstanding of service in a combat zone is that things aren't always busy. There's a lot of downtime and a lot of boredom if you aren't at the tip of the spear. Things aren't always go, 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 and there are sometimes more amenities available than one might imagine. For half of my deployment, I was on a large base that served 4 meals a day. The 3 usual ones plus mid-rats, which were meals served in the middle of the night. Mid-rats were available because we were on an air base and pilots and other service members who worked all hours of the day needed to have an additional available time for chow other than typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There were so many options for each meal in that chow hall. There was even Baskin-Robbins ice cream available practically every time we ate. There was a trailer full of barbers waiting to cut your hair and massage your neck and head, tailoring services, and a post office. We could buy things like TVs and radios at the PX. There were multiple gyms. They even had a 10K run one morning. I still have the t-shirt they gave each participant and wear it frequently to the gym. Of course, not every base had everything we did, but there was always a lot of downtime, nonetheless. And what you choose to do with all that downtime could determine how successful or unsuccessful your deployment was during and upon returning home. Another common occurrence in a combat zone, and just in the military in general, is that everyone isn't always on the same side, even about the most mundane, basic level things like safety or personal well-being. In places you think you are the safest, sometimes end up being the most dangerous. The incident with me happened because of poor leadership, a lack of integrity and personal pride, and a misunderstanding of brotherhood. We all knew Marines were sleeping in towers overnight and ignoring basic security duties for weeks, probably even months. And no one with authority wanted to set a standard.
This isn't the most fucked up thing, but it is fucked up. Watching someone die, knowing you couldn't help them with what you have. Also knowing that there was a 10-minute ride away that could help, but you couldn't do it because to even get that one person into the ride would risk the lives of everyone helping. Being a 22-year-old kid living a mostly sheltered life, you aren't sure what to do in those instances. Is it worth risking the lives of 4 others to save one person? Not only that, but to find out they were killed by friendly fire, that was horrifying. You play back all the decisions you made and all the information you sent up to try and see if it was your call that accidentally identified one of your guys in a complex and fluid engagement as a hostile. Was it your call that killed him?
Transitioning out of the Marine Corps was a very odd time for me. On one hand, I knew I needed to separate myself from the emotional connection I had, and on the other hand, the Marine Corps had given me some of the most intense ideas of what true care and concern for another human being can feel like. My Purple Heart ceremony was one of the biggest letdowns I've ever experienced. Whenever I look back on it, I realize how silly it was of me to think it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for my family, who had been separated for most of my military life, to see and hear some of the most beautiful and heartwarming moments someone in service can share. To see and hear the pride, to see and hear the love, to see and hear the passion and connection, to see and hear the utmost love one person can have for others in places that make it tough to love day in and day out. The captain who awarded me the medal that day didn't know me at all, having checked into our unit while many of us were deployed. And I don't remember who the senior SAP NCO was that read the citation, but they didn't know me either. The captain and first sergeant who did know me, who did know my work in country, who did know and see the love I had for my guys day in and day out, couldn't be there that day. So instead of having the teacher who had watched me learn and grow through an entire school year, who would have had so many glowing things to share out loud about me as they shook my hand, I was given a medal by a substitute that day, who didn't know my heart and had trouble remembering my name. What stood out the most for me as I left the Marine Corps was the impersonal and emotionless checkup separation process. I felt it in the initial weeks spent in North Carolina after returning home post-IED explosion, and I felt it inside the cold walls of my reserve unit back in San Jose.
So life now is a little bit better. No one that I'm aware of is trying to kill me, so that's kind of cool. It's a lot calmer now, but I'm still trying to piece my life together and move forward. Achieving things like not only getting a bachelor's degree, but also getting a freaking master's degree. I didn't think that was possible when I was a kid, and I've just been trying to earn what I've been gifted. The biggest thing I'm missing is finding the people to build that same camaraderie that I had in the military. It's harder to find people you can trust in the civilian side of life because you don't know how they'll react in adverse situations or what they think about what you've done in those adverse situations to get through what you did to get through. But the guys I served with, you knew they were ride or die, even if you didn't quite get along. In some ways, life is better, given that I have earned my education rather than if I'd gone to college and screwed around for a few years. I don't think I was mature enough back then to be set loose upon the world to make my own decisions when I joined the military. In other ways, life isn't that much better. Physically, I could be doing a lot better, mentally and emotionally. I have scarring experiences that I haven't been able to share and don't think I'll ever be comfortable with sharing. It's hard when you think It's hard when you have those days of memories creeping in and you don't know who to tell about it. You just kind of sit there hoping for a better memory to wash it away.
I turned 22 shortly after being tossed into the fray at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. And with much less panic and yelling, my son, Emilio Isaiah Gallegos, turned 3 near the end of my 3-month hiatus. That was the first birthday party I wasn't around for, and the first of many celebrations I would miss over the next 11 years. Mission accomplishment does come before troop welfare, after all, something we would all grow accustomed to. He was there to greet me on Family Day, the reuniting hours the day before graduation. As soon as we broke formation in front of the crowd of people, he ran to me and jumped into my arms. His green polo pressed so hard against my khaki blouse, you would have thought they were sewn together.
So my job in the military was an infantryman. I was stationed in Hawaii with the 2nd Brigade, 25th Infantry Division, 1st Battalion, 21st Infantry Battalion, called the Gimlets. I was assigned to Charlie Company with the Heavy Weapons Team in Headquarters Platoon. I was the command launch unit bearer for the Javelin, which meant I got to carry the thing, but I never got to fire it. So it was cool, but it was awkward to carry, and it weighed around 40 to 45 pounds. It sucked because I would have to carry that, sometimes a spare missile, and my own gear. So I wasn't carrying the lightest of equipment. I hated it, especially on the long road marches. But I was eventually moved to the heavy machine gun team, carrying the 50 cal as the gunner, and being able to shoot it. So that was pretty fun for me. It was kind of cool, but it still sucked. Easier than the command launch unit. But either way, it was a good experience for me. And after my unit that was deployed got back, they moved me to the 3rd Platoon as a squad automatic weapons gunner. That wasn't so bad. Met a lot of cool dudes in that unit. And I got to do some, I guess you could call it extracurricular training to be considered part of the team. I didn't think it was too crazy, but I guess crazy is a relative term depending on when you enlisted. After a few months in Hawaii, I got told I was coming down on orders to meet the needs of the Army, and off I was to Fort Lewis, Washington in September. So that was hell. The change in climate was brutal. Going from balmy 75 to 80 degree weather to the low 30s in a heartbeat sucked. The one thing I learned with the unit I was going to was it was a cav unit. It wasn't ideal for me being an infantryman, but I thought whatever. I figured I wouldn't be walking as much. But I was wrong. My first sergeant and platoon sergeant were pretty hard chargers, and they were constantly killing our vehicles during training, forcing us to ruck maybe 10, 15 miles every day after training to make sure that we were ready for combat. That unit eventually refagged from the 2nd Cavalry Regiment to 4th Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division. I served with Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Infantry, also called the Tomahawks. During that time, I went from a saw gunner, 240 gunner, grenadier, and eventually a rifleman with EMT training. During our train up for deployment, I got to compete in and earn my expert infantryman's badge. I eventually became a vehicle commander and a team leader with that same unit.
I served in Soto Cano Air Force Base, Honduras, and this country felt like home. Honduras is a neighboring country to Guatemala, and I grew up visiting Guatemala several times in my childhood, so showing up in Honduras felt like a paid vacation. I deployed here as a 35 November, which is a signals intel analyst on a SOD-A team, which stands for Special Operations Team Alpha. This element was attached to 7th Special Forces 2nd Battalion. I expected it to be something I had never experienced before, but I learned that Central American countries are so similar. I was also stationed in Niger, Africa. I had no idea what to expect. I thought of the heat, the straw hut houses, and tribes. Showing up to Niamey, which is the capital of Niger, I was surprised to see that there was somewhat advanced. And it was a built-up city with decent infrastructure. I was deployed here as a 38 Bravo, a civil affairs specialist on a 4-man team. We had our own vehicles and got to see a lot of the city due to how some of our operations were set up. And lastly, Quito, Ecuador. Felt very familiar. But I noticed there was a distinction between Central American countries and Southern American countries. I can't put my finger on it, but there's a different vibe. It might be the influence of the cultures being vaster in Southern American countries versus the Central. I was deployed here as a 38 Bravo, again, a civil affairs specialist on a 4-man team. And a fun fact about this deployment, I deployed in January of 2020 and was there during the onset of the pandemic. The U.S. ambassador ended up making the call to send us home on an emergency flight, and we were out by April.
The greatest joy for me during my time in the Marine Corps was building bonds with other people. On the most basic level of human connectivity, I say emotions bring us together more than anything, especially the spiritual and emotional experience of something like combat. We are saying, well, at least I was saying, not only will I be here for you, but I would bleed for you. Not only will I bleed for you, but I will die for you. And I meant it every single day. Now, granted, we didn't face intense contact or interaction with adversaries and hostiles day in and day out. Our deployment was rather quiet and uneventful. But there were pockets of busyness, adrenaline-filled circumstances, and an always lingering urgency of hypervigilance. For as long as I can remember, I've always had an others-first mentality, and that is still a space I live in heavily today. So things like sacrifice, protection, and the well-being of others are ideas that push me to perform and show up continually.
Our first casualty. My buddy and my roommate died in a mortar attack on base after we had just completed a raid and were sharing intel with our S2. Before the attack, he was standing next to me, trying to get me to drink a non-alcoholic beer. After the explosion, I was wounded, and the last thing I remember while I was being carried away in a stretcher was seeing him sitting in his striker. I thought he was fine. As I traversed my way through the combat support hospitals in Iraq, Kuwait, and eventually when I arrived in Germany, I got confirmation that he had died. It was the lowest point. And going through the different hospitals and hearing the screams and night terrors of dudes who had just gotten wounded, it fucked me up pretty badly during that recovery period. There was no one I could talk to because there's no one that would talk about it. It was just kind of an open secret. No one would talk about how to make it better.
The most memorable process of leaving the military was the fact that I was doing it during the pandemic. I had no idea that was going to affect, if it was going to affect any of my benefits, how that was going to change the environment for me going back to school, how that changed jobs and their availability. It was honestly a scary thought, but I had this fuck it feeling, as in whatever's going on out there in the civilian world literally could not be worse than what's going on here in uniform, which was the toxic leadership where only toxic people were being promoted so their buddies could be in leadership with them. The nonsensical missions that were being thrown out by team captains and the lack of fighting back by the team sergeants. The continuous promotion by teams saying, you're 25% of the team, so speak up. But when you speak up, it's not something that they like. They threaten you with firing you from the team. When you're in a company-sized deployment, you can kind of deal with it by finding others to embrace the suck with. But when you're on a 4-man team and both leaders make no sense and no one's fighting for what's right, it gets very lonely.
Today, my life is what I describe as being in a transformational stage. There have been many transformational stages in my life, but I feel this one is the most important, where I truly need to be and one that will allow me to be the most effective human I can be. Writing has become a major part of who I am, having realized that English literature was something I found great interest in back in 2010 at a local junior college. I began welcoming words and writing into my everyday struggle. So I always say that English literature saved my life as I began to realize what I could do with all my emotions and feelings, and that I can take control of my days and what they would become. From San Jose City College, I moved on to San Jose State University, where I graduated in 2019 with a Bachelor of Arts in English with a concentration in creative writing. When I quickly realized I wanted to continue to grow as an artist and as a person, I enrolled at the MFA program in writing at California College of the Arts in San Francisco, earning that degree in May of 2022. So my life has become a continuous journey of healing with and through words, through conversations with others, and through pushing to live in vulnerability together for moments at a time. My dog, my family, and I are featured subjects in a documentary that is currently making its way through film festivals around the country. And that has opened an entirely new avenue of connectivity for my family and I.
Solaris Squared is what people called me because I was such a square. I followed the rules, ran at least 6 miles every day, worked 40 hours a week, and literally never went anywhere. I'm the firstborn of 3 in a Hispanic family. Both of my parents are Guatemalan immigrants from a very small village where old school mentalities and ways are still very prominent. My dad wanted me to be home if I wasn't at school or work. I lived under a rock, and we were also very family-oriented set of siblings. So I always took my younger sister and my brother out. We would always be at the drive-in, eating out at the mall, or at the park where I would take them for runs.
The enlistment process was kind of simple. I was going into my senior year, and I just turned 18. Knowing I couldn't afford the SAT or ACTs, I just walked into the recruiter station and enlisted. For context, my brother had enlisted in the Navy about 8 years prior, right after high school, and my sister had joined the Air Force 3 years before I did, before I joined the military after trying community college for a few years. So I didn't want to join in either one of those two branches and end up running into them. I tried to join the Marines, but the recruiters were never in their office. I think I walked into the Army recruiting station, and it was one of those Army of One times. They were offering 150 plus MOSs, military occupation specialties or whatever. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but after a few practices with the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, my recruiter wanted me to take the real ASVAB. And I didn't know what I scored, but he was pretty excited. He said I could pretty much pick any job I wanted. He kept pushing me to do intel or something like that. But I was hooked on the prospect out of jumping out of airplanes, fast roping out of helicopters, and blowing stuff up. He showed me that video of the infantry guys, and I was like, I want to do that. Like every angsty high school kid who spent most of their time playing video games and didn't realize their full potential. So despite their protests, the recruiter got me to enlist as an infantryman. And I think I got a pretty good bonus, $5,000 in my choice of duty station, which was Hawaii. It wasn't bad, but my recruiter did promise me a steak dinner after basic training, and I never got it. It's been almost 20 years, and I'm still waiting for that dinner. That was the most disappointing part of the process, but looking back on it, probably should have joined the Air Force or something. I don't regret what I did, but I think being in the Air Force would have made my life a lot easier right now. Boot camp, it was shit. I was stuck at 30th AG, Adjutant General Battalion, at Fort Benning, in processing and waiting for a battalion to graduate. It was the closest to purgatory I ever want to get to. It was just a game of staying awake and playing cat and mouse with the drill sergeants to sham out and hide so that they don't catch you sleeping. It felt like a mini prison, but with crappier food. However, it did help me get acclimated to the hell of Georgia summers, especially coming from the dry California summer. The biggest thing I was getting used to was waking up at 4:30 a.m., especially with the time change, and getting used to doing nothing all day and trying to stay awake until about 9 p.m. The time difference didn't really make that easier, but eventually your body just kind of gets used to it.
My job in the Marine Corps was a traffic management specialist that carried an MOS, military occupational specialty of 3112, and took me to Fort Eustis, Virginia for schooling. I joined the Marine Corps as a reservist, as a single father not wanting to leave his 3-year-old son to possibly fill obligations in any number of places around the country or world. I checked into my unit in my hometown of San Jose, California, which was just 1 block from where I lived. For almost 2 years, I did the 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year thing. And I began to work as a trainer at a local gym immediately upon my return from Virginia. First in the evenings and eventually transitioning to the first shift of the day. I would arrive at 4:30 a.m. for the 5 a.m. opening. On the morning of September 11, 2001, while out on the gym floor, I watched American Airlines Flight 11 fly into one of the World Trade Center towers with a group of regulars as they rode stationary bikes, with eyes fixed on 2 televisions at the front of the room. 16 minutes later, we watched the second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, crash into the South Tower, while a large cloud of black smoke billowed from the top of the North. In those moments between 5:46 a.m. and 6:09 a.m., I realized my life would be changed forever. I just didn't know how.
I have not served in battle, but I have had several battle buddies, including an ex-partner of mine, who were deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. What I learned is that having a stable support system at home is extremely important, and I could say that for any deployment in any part of the world. The only misperception I can think of is having that image of your deployed battle buddies or loved ones as strong and invincible. I would argue to say that this is the most fragile time in their life. They are extremely stressed physically and mentally, and some experience the loss of friends or witness things they weren't ready to see.
So earning my expert infantryman's badge after getting 2 out of the 3 possible no-goes on day 1 and acing all the tasks for the rest of the testing phase was remarkable for me. But I was sweating bullets the entire time. The fact that only one of my guys in my squad that I helped train up failed the EIB was exceptional for me, especially as a private first class, training other privates to get their EIB and all but one got it. That was an awesome feeling and an amazing accomplishment for me. We were the only squad in our company, maybe even our battalion, with such a low attrition rate. I think only 15% of our brigade got their expert infantry badge, so 5 out of 6 squad members wasn't too bad for me. I was also awarded a Purple Heart, which was pinned to my pillow and in Germany by some diplomat who didn't know me. The ceremony was uneventful. He came to my pillow, shook my hand, gave me his coin, and pinned my Purple Heart on my pillow and walked out. No pictures, no words. I was also awarded the Bronze Star with Valor by General Petraeus in Fob War Horse in Iraq. I don't remember what I did to earn it, but apparently it was pretty amazing. I helped save someone's life, but it didn't mean much to me. A few soldiers talked shit about me getting that award during the ceremony. They said, "Why should I get an award for just doing my job?" So that one doesn't matter to me, because if I could trade that Bronze Star for my buddy, I would in a heartbeat.
Probably the lowest point of my military career was when I lost rank before our deployment to Iraq. I had been a Marine for about 9 years when it happened, and I'd been a sergeant for at least a couple of years. I remember the pain in the air the day that it happened. Sure, I felt horrible and brokenhearted, and like I was spiraling down a drain when it happened. But what I remember most about that afternoon was the pain on the faces of the rest of the Marines in the room. A handful of peers and a group of staff NCOs, all of whom had the utmost respect for me, for who I was, and for what I stood for. There was nothing any of them could do to prevent the circumstances from happening, and believe me, they all wished they could have. The decision came from way above our pay grades. It was final and unwavering. I remember feeling lost when I walked out of the room that day, almost dizzy and unfocused, as if floating, and I didn't know what to do with myself. But the loss of rank directly led to me being in the position I found myself in while deployed. Instead of sitting in the air-conditioned office every day as a senior sergeant in the collection of sister units that made up our company, manning radio check-ins and shift changeovers between hours of lots of downtime while working, I was made available to be out doing things, which eventually led to me moving to another base halfway through our deployment.
It was during my deployment in Africa at as a civil affairs specialist on a 4-man team. And generally, you have a captain who's an O3 as a team leader, a sergeant first class who's an E7 as a team sergeant, a team medic that could either be an E6 or an E7, and a civil affairs non-commissioned officer who's generally an E6. I was that civil affairs non-commissioned officer on the team, and this was my first deployment in this job 6 months after graduating. The only one with deployment experience on this team in the job was our team sergeant. The officer was brand new and came from an artillery battalion with no previous deployments. The officer wanted to run a mission where I would drive 24 hours to get to a location so he could gather information from that area. What didn't make sense to anyone was that he expected me to drive the entire route, no sleep, no breaks. Moreover, the team sergeant, who had previous experience in this job while deployed, didn't have any rejections to the mission. At this point, I realized this captain was out to get praise from the company any way that he could, and without considering anyone's life on the team. I was frustrated, angry, scared because I had no say in my own life, and most of all, disappointed in what Special Operations stood for. What made it worse was the team sergeant was a yes man. So he didn't fight any authority, which was part of his job to protect the rest of the team. At one point, when I spoke up, he threatened to have me kicked off the team and sent back to the U.S. And that was the most frustrating and miserable I had ever felt. Knowing you don't have a voice on a 4-man team that you count 25% for. Every sacrifice I had made to be part of the Special Operations team became completely pointless. Life now is still a little confusing. I don't fully feel like I've transitioned, and I'm coming to terms with the idea that I may never fully transition. The military was practically 9 years of my young adult life, typically when someone's most impressionable. I think right now I'm at the point where I'm okay with my identities. I'm a female, firstborn, Latina, Army veteran. What I'm trying to focus on is what identity I want to establish as a civilian. And it's hard, especially when all you've known is your name tape and your rank. I think what's important is to keep in mind that you can establish goals. As veterans, we're used to having missions, aka goals, and my mind is very much wired to work best when I have something I'm looking forward to accomplishing. As a civilian, I'm in school. I set my semester goals, my yearly goals, and my long-term goals, and that's what keeps me sane through all the identity confusion. I've also found that after each semester, a little something has revealed itself to me and made me choose the direction I've chosen.
My experience as a veteran has been very much a roller coaster ride that I sometimes didn't want to be on and often wanted to jump right off of, and one where the lap bar doesn't always come down all the way. Sometimes it has been exciting, sometimes I smile through its twists and turns, and sometimes I'm gritting my teeth through every second of it. Some words I'd like to share in parting are, there is power in vulnerability, and there is strength in places where you feel yourself becoming weak. Not every burden is meant to be carried forever and ever and ever. I end one of my poems with the lines, vulnerable sometimes sounds like honorable. If you say it with arrows in your mouth, there is poetry in every breath. And I truly do believe that. I've also learned that I have a certain amount of responsibility in cultivating a positive and supportive place to exist in, to live day in and day out, and that I need to be intentional in creating a world where I can give and receive love in ways that fit me best, in ways that give me the space to step away for a while when I need to, and enough comfort to make it okay to reach out for a supportive hand or a supportive heart when I need to. And just because you might have failed once doesn't mean you can never succeed again. Having the clarity to be the best you possible, whatever that may look like, will allow you to contribute to the world in only ways that you can. When you can find that magical space and live in it daily and begin to feel like you're living instead of just existing, It's beautiful.
So far, it's a bit confusing. In my initial 2 years after getting out, I experienced a bit of imposter syndrome. I didn't want to tell anyone I was a veteran. I think there's a strong association with the word veteran and deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. People forget there are other conflicts in the world that the military is also combating. A step further than that, people forget that individuals sign up and don't always deploy. That doesn't make them any less of a veteran, it just means it wasn't in their cards. I'm learning to embrace the identity and be proud of the time that I served. I haven't fully gotten there yet, but I'm working on it. And I think accepting help is the biggest first step in being a veteran. Making those appointments with the VA and attending them. I also enjoy the perks of it, like national state park passes and discounted price for snowboarding or amusement parks. If I had one piece of advice, I would say don't generalize a veteran and try to be empathetic. Everyone's experiences will always be completely different. And some may have been great, others the worst they could have experienced. However, we all decided to sign our name not knowing if one day we'd ever make it back home.
I would describe my service in 2 words: humbling and eye-opening. Those experiences were something that allowed me the opportunity to see things that no one should ever see and do things that no one should ever do. But I also got to learn from a lot of the people that I got to meet. You get to see the lowest of the lows, where the worst people in the world get to be who they truly are. But you also get to find out how the best people in the world rise above that terrible situation. If I could do it again, over 10 out of 10 I would do it again, even if it's just to not mess with the timeline. And if I could leave you all with some advice, I just want to say that veterans were just like you, and just like the civilians, we have experiences that shaped our perceptions and our viewpoints. We aren't any better or any worse. We are you. Veterans and our experiences aren't a monolith. We all come from different backgrounds with different struggles, just like everyone else. So we hope that you enjoyed the show and will continue to support the veteran community. Thank you for taking the time to hear our stories. Happy Veterans Day.
All right, everyone, that concludes our show. Folks, please rise. One more round of applause, please.